What happens when a desperate mother begs a heartbroken stranger for a meal hiding the fact she's worth $6 billion? Thomas, a broke single father, surrendered his last $20 to feed a starving child. He never suspected this fleeting kindness would trigger a dangerous, life-altering corporate war. Rain hammered against the flickering neon sign of O'Malley's Diner, casting a bloody, rhythmic glow across the slick asphalt of downtown Seattle. It was a miserable Tuesday night, the kind of weather that chased honest people indoors and left only the desperate wandering the streets of Pioneer Square. Thomas Reynolds sat in a cracked vinyl corner booth, staring at a lukewarm plate of meatloaf he had absolutely no intention of eating. Opposite him was an empty chair. In the center of the table sat a single untouched chocolate cupcake, topped with a bright pink unlit number 7 candle. Today was his daughter Lily's birthday, and for the first time in her life, Thomas wasn't there to sing to her. He rubbed a tired hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. 6 months ago, Thomas's life had made sense. He ran a mid-sized contracting firm, Reynolds Build Co. It wasn't a corporate empire, but it paid the mortgage on a nice house in Bellevue. Then came the collapse. A predatory real estate developer named Richard Sterling, Richard Garrison, had buried Thomas in frivolous litigation over a massive commercial project. The legal fees bled Reynolds Build Co., dry-forcing Thomas into bankruptcy. Worse than the financial ruin was the custody battle. His ex-wife Sarah had recently married a high-profile orthopedic surgeon. When Thomas lost his home and moved into a cramped studio apartment, Sarah's ruthless attorney struck. They painted Thomas as unstable and financially negligent. Last week, a family court judge granted Sarah full custody, relegating Thomas to supervised alternating weekends. This weekend wasn't his, so he sat alone in a diner that smelled of stale coffee and bleach, celebrating his daughter's birthday with a ghost. The bell above the diner's glass door chimed violently, snapping Thomas out of his grim reverie. A gust of freezing wind swept into the restaurant, bringing with it a woman and a young boy. They looked like they had been walking for miles. The boy, who appeared to be about 6 years old, was shivering violently beneath a soaked, ill-fitting Spider-Man windbreaker. His lips were tinged blue. The woman holding his hand wore a faded, oversized beige trench coat that looked like it had been pulled from a thrift store dumpster. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, dripping rainwater onto the linoleum floor. Thomas watched as the woman guided the boy to a booth across the aisle. She handed him a paper napkin to dry his face, her hands trembling. Brenda, a career waitress with a crooked name tag and a pot of decaf in her hand, approached their table. She didn't look malicious, just utterly exhausted. "Evening, Hon," Brenda said, her voice raspy from decades of smoking. "You need a menu." Just a couple of glasses of water, please," the woman said. Her voice was surprisingly melodic, lacking the rough edge Thomas expected from someone wandering the streets at night. "And maybe if you have any complimentary crackers," Brenda sighed, shifting her weight. "I'm sorry, sweetie. Management changed the rules last month. You got to order a hot meal to sit in the booths. We ain't a shelter." Panic flared in the woman's eyes. She frantically patted the deep pockets of her ruined trench coat, pulling out a crumpled transit receipt and a soaked tissue. No wallet. No cash. "Please," she whispered, glancing at the shivering boy. "Just for 20 minutes until the rain stops." "I can't. Manager's in the back watching the cameras," Brenda said apologetically. "I'll lose my shift." The woman closed her eyes, swallowing hard. She stood up gently, pulling the boy by his arm. "Come on, Leo. We have to go." The boy Leo looked up with wide, tearful eyes. "But Mum, I'm so hungry. My stomach hurts." Thomas felt a sharp, agonizing twist in his chest. He looked at the empty chair across from him, at the pink number 7 candle, and then at Leo. He reached into his worn leather wallet. He had exactly $24 to his name until his paycheck from the lumberyard cleared on Friday. Before the woman could reach the door, Thomas slid out of his booth. "Excuse me," he called out. The woman froze, turning toward him with the defensive posture of a cornered animal. "I couldn't help but overhear," Thomas said, keeping his voice soft, non-threatening. He gestured to the empty booth across from him. "I'm actually waiting for someone who isn't going to show up. I hate eating alone. If you want, you and your son can join me. The table's already paid for." It was a polite fiction. The woman stared at him, her eyes darting between his face and the warm, brightly lit booth. Her pride wrestled violently with her child's suffering. Finally, the mother's instinct won. She walked over, her posture rigid, and stopped at the edge of his table. She looked him dead in the eye, her voice dropping to a fierce, protective whisper. "My son's hungry. Can we stay a while?" "Take a seat," Thomas said, offering a warm, reassuring smile. They slid into the booth. Thomas immediately flagged Brenda down. "Brenda, bring the little guy a double cheeseburger with extra fries and a hot chocolate. Bring the lady a club sandwich and a large coffee." "You got it, Tom." Brenda smiled clearly, relieved she didn't have to kick them out into the storm. "You don't have to do that," the woman said quickly, her hands folded tightly on the Formica table. "A side of fries for Leo is enough. I'm not hungry." "It's already ordered," Thomas said easily. "I'm Thomas, by the way. Thomas Reynolds." The woman hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking his hand. Mary. Her grip was firm, too firm for someone broken by the streets, and as she reached out, the oversized sleeve of her trench coat slipped back just an inch. Thomas caught a flash of shimmering white silk beneath the grimy exterior, and something else, the unmistakable heavy glint of a platinum wristwatch. Thomas didn't say anything, but his contractor's eye for detail immediately went to work. Mary was hiding something. When the food arrived, young Leo attacked the cheeseburger with the kind of ferocity that only comes from genuine hollow starvation. Thomas watched the boy pushing his own plate of meatloaf aside. "Slow down, buddy, or you'll make yourself sick." Thomas chuckled gently. "Listen to him, Leo," the woman said, handing the boy a napkin. As she did, Thomas observed her hands. If this woman was homeless, her hands didn't show it. There were no calluses, no ingrained dirt. Her nails were perfectly shaped, bearing the chipped remains of a high-end French manicure. Her muddy boots, which Thomas had assumed were standard winter wear, bore the faint embossed logo of Loro Piana, custom Italian leather, that cost more than Thomas's first car. "So," Thomas said, taking a sip of his black coffee. "Rough night to be out in Pioneer Square." "We missed our bus," she replied quickly. Too quickly. Her eyes constantly darted toward the large glass windows of the diner, scanning the dark street outside. "We're just passing through, trying to get to Portland." "Portland's a good town," Thomas noted, playing along. "I have a daughter about Leo's age. Lily. She just turned 7. He nodded toward the solitary cupcake. The woman's defensive demeanor softened for a moment. She looked at the candle, then at Thomas's tired eyes, immediately understanding the unspoken heartbreak. "I'm sorry she isn't here with you, Thomas." "Me too," he murmured. Suddenly, the ambient hum of the diner was pierced by the heavy, aggressive roar of high-performance engines. Tires screeched against the wet pavement outside. Thomas looked out the window. 2 matte black Cadillac Escalades had just violently mounted the curb in front of O'Malley's. They weren't police cruisers. They had deep tinted windows and Washington plates. Before the engines even cut off, the doors swung open. 3 men stepped out into the pouring rain. They wore perfectly tailored dark suits and long wool overcoats. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, checking their surroundings. One of them, a towering man with a severe buzz cut and an earpiece pointed directly at the diner's front door. Across the table, the woman let out a sharp, breathless gasp. All the color drained from her face. She grabbed Leo by the collar of his Spider-Man jacket, pulling him down below the level of the window. "Mary," Thomas asked, his heart rate spiking. "What is it?" "They found us," she whispered, her voice cracking with pure terror. She looked at Thomas, her eyes wide and pleading. "Thomas, please. If they take my son, I will never see him again. Hide us. Please." Every instinct in Thomas's body told him to stay out of it. He had enough problems. He was broke, fighting a losing custody battle, and these men outside looked like highly trained mercenaries. But he looked at little Leo trembling under the table and thought of Lily. "Get up," Thomas commanded in a low, authoritative voice. "Keep your heads down. Follow me." Thomas slid out of the booth, shielding them with his broad frame. He walked briskly past the counter, pushing through the swinging metal doors into the diner's cramped, grease-stained kitchen. Old Joe, the night cook, looked up from the grill, a spatula frozen in his hand. "Hey, customers ain't allowed back here. Tom, health inspector's out front. Joe trying to save you a citation." Thomas lied smoothly, tossing a $10 bill onto the prep counter. "We need the alley door. Now." Joe glanced at the money, grunted, and thumbed toward the heavy steel fire door at the back. "Don't trip over the garbage cans." Thomas shoved the heavy metal bar, opening the door to the freezing rain of the back alley. He pushed the woman and Leo out into the dark. "My truck is the rusted blue Ford F-150 right there. Get in the bed and pull the tarp over yourselves. Do not make a sound." As they scrambled toward the truck, Thomas let the steel door close behind him, remaining inside the kitchen. He took a deep breath, grabbed a stray coffee mug from the dish rack, and walked back through the swinging doors into the main dining area. The diner had gone dead silent. The 3 men in suits were standing near the entrance. The towering man with the buzz cut was aggressively leaning over Brenda's counter. "I'm not asking for a menu," the man growled, his voice like grinding gravel. He pulled out a sleek iPhone 15 Pro Max and shoved the screen into Brenda's face. "I'm looking for this woman and a 6-year-old boy. Have they been in here?" Thomas stepped forward, casually sipping his empty mug. "Hey, Brenda, you going to top this off or what?" The man in the suit turned his cold, dead eyes on Thomas. He stepped away from Brenda, closing the distance between them. "You. Did you see the woman in this photo?" Thomas looked at the phone. It was Mary. But in the photo, she wasn't wearing a trashy trench coat. She was dressed in an immaculate, diamond-studded evening gown, standing in front of a private Gulfstream jet. Thomas blinked, feigning mild surprise. "Yeah, actually I did. About 10 minutes ago." The man grabbed Thomas by the lapel of his flannel shirt. "Where did she go?" Thomas didn't flinch. He looked down at the man's hand, then back up. "She came in asking for cash. When Brenda told her to get lost, she took the kid and ran south down 4th Avenue, said she was trying to catch the midnight Greyhound." The suited man stared at Thomas, his eyes scanning for a lie. Finding none in Thomas's exhausted, beaten-down face, he released the shirt. "If you're lying to me, I'll come back and burn this grease trap to the ground." He snapped his fingers, and the 3 men stormed out. Within seconds, the Escalades roared to life and sped off toward the bus station. Thomas let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He walked back through the kitchen and out into the alley. The rain was coming down harder now. He approached his truck and pulled back the heavy canvas tarp. The woman and Leo were huddled together, shivering uncontrollably. "They're gone," Thomas said softly. "But they'll figure out I lied soon enough. Get in the cab. The heater works, at least." Once they were inside the warm cab of the truck, the woman wiped the mud from her face. She looked at Thomas, her expression shifting from terror to a steely, calculated resolve. "I need a ride to Portland tonight," she said, her tone suddenly carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "I can pay you whatever you want." Thomas let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. He put the keys in the ignition, but didn't turn them. "Lady, you couldn't afford a cup of coffee 10 minutes ago. And those guys back there. Those weren't bill collectors. Who exactly are you?" She stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached into the deep lining of her ruined trench coat. She pulled a seam apart, extracting a thick, vacuum-sealed stack of crisp $100 bills, and tossed it onto the dashboard. "My name isn't Mary," she said, pulling off the cheap wig she was wearing to reveal striking, perfectly styled auburn hair. "My real name is Claire Harrington. I am the CEO of Harrington Nexus, and if my husband's private security team catches me, he will force me to sign over my 60% majority stake in the company." She pulled Leo closer, her eyes blazing with maternal fury. "And worse, he'll take my son to a non-extradition country, and I will never see him again. Will you help us, Thomas?" The rusted blue Ford F-150 barreled down Interstate 5, its windshield wipers working frantically to push away the torrential Pacific Northwest rain. Inside the dimly lit cab, the heater blasted dry, warm air. Little Leo had finally fallen asleep, his head resting heavily against his mother's shoulder, his breathing steady for the first time all evening. Thomas kept his eyes glued to the slick asphalt, his hands gripping the cracked leather steering wheel at 10 and 2. The thick stack of vacuum-sealed $100 bills still sat on the dashboard, illuminated by the faint green glow of the instrument panel. "I mean it, Thomas," Claire said, her voice barely rising above the rhythmic thumping of the wipers. She had shed the filthy trench coat, looking utterly out of place in the worn passenger seat. "That money is yours, just for getting us out of Seattle. I have more stashed in Portland, but I need access to a secure server before the stock exchange opens at 6:30 a.m. "Keep it," Thomas replied, his jaw clenched tight. "I didn't hide you for a payday. I hid you because no mother should have to look over her shoulder while her kid starves." Claire studied his profile in the dark. "You're a good man, Thomas. The world usually breaks good men first." "It already did," Thomas muttered bitterly, thinking of Lily's empty chair at the diner. "You said your husband is trying to steal your company. How does a spouse just walk away with a $6 billion corporate empire?" Claire sighed, shifting her weight carefully so as not to wake Leo. David was always ambitious, but he lacked vision. "I built Harrington Nexus from a college dorm room into a global logistics network. When we married, I foolishly gave him a seat on the board. Over the last year, our marriage fell apart. I filed for divorce and he panicked. He knew the prenuptial agreement would leave him with pennies compared to the company's valuation." She looked out the window at the passing blurred lights. He allied himself with a shadow investor, a ruthless private equity raider. Together they quietly bought out the loyalty of my key board members. Tomorrow morning at an emergency shareholder meeting, they plan to vote me out on grounds of gross negligence and force a liquidation of my shares. David hired those mercenaries to secure Leo. He knows I would surrender my entire fortune to keep my son safe. Thomas frowned, checking his rearview mirror for any sign of trailing headlights. "Who is the investor funding this coup? It takes a massive amount of liquid capital to bribe a corporate board." "A Seattle real estate developer," Claire said, her voice dripping with venom. He uses shell companies, but I bypassed his firewalls last week. His name is Richard Garrison." Thomas slammed on the brakes. The truck fishtailed violently on the wet highway tires, screeching in protest as Thomas wrestled for control. He pulled the heavy vehicle onto the muddy shoulder, the engine idling loudly as the hazard lights clicked on. Leo stirred but didn't wake. Claire gripped the dashboard, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Thomas, what are you doing?" Thomas slowly turned his head. His eyes, previously weighed down by exhaustion, were now burning with an intense, terrifying clarity. "Who did you say?" "Richard Garrison." Claire repeated, confused and alarmed. "He owns Garrison Development Corporation? Why?" Thomas let out a low, humorless laugh that bordered on a growl. He put the truck in park and rubbed his temples. 6 months ago, I owned a commercial contracting firm. We were hired to build a massive downtown high-rise. The developer breached the contract, refused to pay for $20 million in materials, and buried me in endless fraudulent litigation. He drained my company dry, forced me into bankruptcy, and ruined my credit. He looked directly into Claire's eyes. Because of that bankruptcy, my ex-wife's lawyers painted me as an unstable deadbeat. Last week, I lost custody of my 7-year-old daughter. The man who hired my firm was Richard Garrison. A heavy, stunned silence fell over the cab of the truck. The universe had a cruel, twisted sense of humor, binding a destitute contractor and a billionaire CEO together on a lonely highway with the exact same nemesis. "He used your company to launder the capital." Claire realized, her sharp CEO mind connecting the dots instantly. "Garrison inflated the material costs, refused to pay you, and funneled the shadow money into offshore accounts to bribe my board of directors. You were the fall guy." Thomas shifted the truck back into drive, his grip on the wheel, turning his knuckles white. He merged violently back onto the highway, the speedometer needle climbing rapidly. "I don't want your money on the dashboard, Claire." Thomas said, his voice cold and resolute. "I want my daughter back, and to do that, I need to prove Garrison is a fraud." Claire's lips curled into a fierce, predatory smile. For the first time all night, she looked like the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire. "Take us to Portland, Thomas. You keep us safe tonight, and I promise you by tomorrow morning, Richard Garrison won't have a penny to his name." At 3:15 a.m., the Ford F-150 pulled into a desolate industrial park on the outskirts of Portland. Thomas navigated through a maze of shipping containers and parked behind a rusted corrugated metal building bearing a faded sign that read Pendleton Tech Solutions. "My buddy Arthur owns this place," Thomas explained as he killed the engine. "He used to run the IT department for my contracting firm before Garrison wiped us out. If anyone has a secure, untraceable terminal, it's Artie." Thomas pounded on the heavy steel door. A minute later, a disheveled man in his mid-30s with thick glasses and a Star Wars t-shirt cracked the door open, holding a heavy Maglite flashlight like a club. "Tommy." Arthur squinted, lowering the flashlight. "What the hell are you doing here at 3 a.m? I need a massive favor, Artie." Thomas said, pushing past him and ushering Claire and a sleep-groggy Leo inside. "We need your fastest terminal, completely encrypted routing through a VPN that can bypass a corporate firewall in Seattle. Now." Arthur looked at Claire, his eyes widening as he recognized her face from the cover of Forbes magazine he had sitting on his desk. "Holy, you're Claire Harrington." "I am Claire said all business now, and I have exactly 3 hours to initiate a hostile counter-takeover of my own company. Where is the terminal?" Arthur scrambled to the back of the warehouse, pulling a tarp off a high-end, custom-built server rack. "Sit here. Keyboards wired directly to a decentralized network. They won't be able to trace the IP." As Claire's fingers began flying across the mechanical keyboard, a sudden sharp beep echoed from Arthur's main security monitor. Tommy," Arthur said, his voice trembling. "Did you guys bring company?" Thomas rushed to the monitors. Outside, 3 matte-black Escalades had just violently breached the chain-link fence of the industrial park, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The mercenaries had found them. "How?" Thomas demanded, panic rising in his chest. "We made sure we weren't followed." Claire stopped typing, her eyes dropping to Leo's Spider-Man jacket. She reached into the thick, insulated lining of the collar, her fingers finding a hard, coin-sized lump sewn into the fabric. She ripped it out. It was a military-grade GPS tracker. "David gave him this jacket for his birthday last week," Claire whispered, horrified. "He was tracking his own son." "Artie, take the boy into the server room and lock the vault door," Thomas commanded. He ran out to his truck, grabbing a heavy canvas tool bag from the bed, before sprinting back inside and slamming the heavy warehouse door shut. He didn't have weapons, but he was a master contractor. Thomas quickly slid a massive steel I-beam through the door handles, bracing it against the concrete floor. He pulled out a portable acetylene torch and sparked the flame, rapidly welding the hinges of the door to the steel frame, creating a makeshift vault. "Claire, how much time do you need?" Thomas yelled over the screeching of tires outside. 2 minutes, Claire shouted, her eyes fixed on the code scrolling across the screen. "I'm deploying the Titan protocol. It's a poison pill I coded into the company's foundation. It permanently transfers my 60% stake into an irrevocable blind trust in Leo's name, naming me the sole executor." Bang, bang. Heavy sledgehammers slammed against the exterior steel door. The metal groaned, but Thomas's welds held firm. "I'm also routing all the offshore bank records, the ones proving Garrison and David's bribery and embezzlement, directly to the SEC, the FBI, and the Seattle District Attorney's Office." Claire typed furiously, beads of sweat rolling down her forehead. Crash one of the high warehouse windows shattered as a grappling hook flew inside. The mercenaries were trying to breach the roof. "Send it!" Thomas roared, grabbing a heavy iron wrench from his bag, positioning himself between the descending ropes and Claire. "Send it now." "Done!" Claire hit the final enter key. The screen flashed green, transfer complete, encryption locked, files dispatched. Almost simultaneously, the wail of police sirens pierced the night air. Arthur had triggered his silent alarm the moment the fence was breached. Red and blue lights flooded the industrial park. The mercenaries, realizing they were exposed, abandoned the roof ropes and scrambled back into their Escalades, peeling out into the night, just as the Portland Police Department swarmed the compound. Thomas dropped the iron wrench. He looked over at Claire, who was slumped back in the office chair, tears of relief streaming down her face. She had saved her son. She had saved her empire. And she had kept her promise. 2 months later, the sun was shining brightly over Bellevue, Washington. Thomas sat in the park, pushing Lily on the swings. Her bright laughter echoed through the trees, a sound Thomas thought he might never hear on a weekend again. A sleek black Maybach pulled up to the curb. Claire stepped out, wearing an immaculate tailored suit, holding Leo's hand. They walked over to the swings. "You're looking well, Thomas." Claire smiled. "I feel well." Thomas beamed, scooping Lily into his arms. The last 8 weeks had been a whirlwind. The moment Claire's files hit the FBI servers, Richard Garrison's empire collapsed overnight. He was arrested on 32 counts of fraud, money laundering, and corporate espionage. The judge handling Thomas's bankruptcy case reversed the rulings, returning Reynolds Build Co. to Thomas's control. Armed with his restored reputation and the best family law attorney's money could buy, courtesy of Claire, Thomas easily won back joint custody of Lily. His ex-wife's lawyer didn't even put up a fight. The board officially ousted David yesterday, Claire noted, handing Thomas a manila envelope. He's facing 10 years in federal prison. And as for Harrington Nexus, we just purchased a massive plot of commercial real estate in downtown Seattle. Thomas opened the envelope. It was a finalized multi-million-dollar contract naming Reynolds Build Co. as the exclusive lead contractor for the new Harrington Nexus global headquarters. We need the best builder in the city, Claire smiled warmly. And I only trust my friends. Thomas looked at the contract, then at Lily, and finally at Claire. He didn't have an empty chair anymore. His life was full, built on the foundation of a single $20 bill and a choice to be kind in the dark. We'll start breaking ground on Monday. Thomas smiled. When life pushed Thomas to the brink, his choice to help a desperate mother changed his destiny. From a cold diner to the top of the corporate world, this story proves that true kindness always pays off, and villains like Garrison will always face justice. Did you expect that massive tracker twist? Drop a like if this story kept you on the edge of your seat. Share it with someone who loves an incredible comeback, and subscribe for more thrilling real-life dramas.